Hi, I'm Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu, and this is another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. Thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate it. This episode should be an interesting one. It's been an extremely busy time lately for me, being based in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. It's our Japanese black pine decandling time, so that's big for me. I've got a lot of black pines that I have to work my way through, and I thought it would be worthwhile at this point in time to keep it current with the podcast and maybe just discuss a few issues or a few facts that occur with decandling and why we should do it and when we shouldn't and all that sort of thing. So that'll be part of this podcast. There'll be more talk on the fundamentals of design, continuing through with talking about colour this time and space. Two really important things that I consider to be absolutely crucial to my enjoyment of bonsai. So we'll talk about that. And also, just to continue the thread for the last couple of podcasts on my time in Japan, I've had a read of some more of my notes I took way back in 2012. So just over 10 years ago, or 10 and a half years ago, that I still find really important and interesting now, and rereading my notes with that thirst for knowledge. It'll be interesting for you today. So stick around. I hope you enjoy the podcast, which I'm sure you will. And let's get into it, eh? Okay. Decandling. Decandling is a really simple, easy process. It's the complete removal of the spring candle partway through the growing season to force a second flush of growth. Now, some of the incorrect use of this technique on pines that maybe definitely shouldn't be used on is where a lot of bonsai enthusiasts go wrong. So this podcast is to not really get into the why we can'ts for thing, but it's more to make it maybe a little bit more clear as to why we do it on Japanese black pines. And when I say Japanese black pines, I mean Japanese red pines and Japanese black pines. I lump them both together, but for ease of communication, I'll just talk about the black pines. So the reason why we can go and remove the spring candle for a Japanese black pine is because there's a ring of dormant buds at the base where that spring candle has grown. Other pines, like white pines or Scots pines or mugos or anything like that, they don't have that ring of dormant buds. So decandling, the complete removal of the spring candle, will result in you completely removing any chance that tree's got it having new needles. And on pines, the needles only last for a certain period of time, be it 2-3 years, thereabouts. So once the old needles become useless and the tree starts to drop them, if you keep cutting off the new needles, then the tree ultimately will cark it. So you need some new needles to be kept on there on pines. And with black pines, we can cut them off because for a strong, healthy tree, you can be pretty much reassured that almost, I'd hate to say 100% of the time, but very, very close to 100% of the time, you will force those dormant buds to activate. Now, the big overriding caveat for this is always with anything, if anyone's listened to any of my episodes of the podcast or know me or know how I work with my trees, it's always based on the strength of your bonsai. That's it. It's not just an automatic process that we go into. There's obviously a lot more that goes into making your black pines strong enough to be able to handle decandling, starting from the roots with repotting, how frequently it's done, very strong fertilising in the start of spring to build the tree's strength, fertilising in the previous autumn, fall period to make sure that you've built the tree's strength to get through dormancy. So all those factors go into it. Where you position your tree, how much sun it gets, it's the million different things that we need to do correctly in order to be able to take our bonsai to the next step. And decandling is definitely one of those ones that you don't just automatically do because the calendar says, hey, it's decandling time now for Japanese black pines. I'll go out and cut everything off my trees, because that's a great way to ensure that you're either going to weaken your tree significantly or kill it. So with the black pines, it's really important to understand why we can do it, and we can do it because they have this built-in. It's like a safety switch for them. If something goes wrong with the spring candle growing, then it's got a backup to say, hey, that one's no good. It's been removed. It's been eaten by a bug, or it's been knocked off. Whatever it is, it's been removed from the tree. It's then got a safety mechanism to say, well, I can push these other ones out. And the timing is super critical too, because if you think about why we're decandling, there's a couple of three main reasons, which you may or may not know, is when you decandle, you're taking the branch, instead of being one branch continuing to one branch, so a one-to-one relationship where that branch just keeps getting longer and longer. By removing the spring candle and forcing these dormant buds to grow, we get a one-to-many relationship where these buds will pop out. It could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, depending on the age and strength of the branch and the tree. You can get multiple buds growing. So therefore, we can go from one to many, which means we get our ramification. The clean-out process is another thing which happens down the track, but we get to our 1 to 2. The branch starts to fork. So we can do that with decandling. That's one of the things. The second is that we're reducing the growing period for that particular bud. Right, so if the bud starts growing in spring and finishes sometime in autumn, winter, then by decandling somewhere in that period, we're restarting the growing period. So therefore, we're shortening the amount of time that bud has to grow, which therefore means that we end up with shorter needles, which is just logical because you're shortening the period of time for those needles to grow. So second thing we get is shorter needles. The third thing we get is shorter internodes. So the distance between where the bud started and where it finishes becomes your branch length. And because we're shortening that growing period, we therefore get shorter internodes. So it's a really cool way of, and it's a great technique with black pines that should be used when you've got a strong enough bonsai to do it. Your pine is strong enough, and I just assume that that's very clear now, that don't just do this unless your tree is strong enough. So I'm not going to mention it again, but it's a great technique that we can use to get all those three things. Shorter needle length is a really, really common thing that gets talked about with all pines. Oh, how do I get shorter needles? How do I get this? How do I get that? It's like, just relax, because you will get there by using the right techniques. And as the tree ages, the needles will naturally get shorter as the resources have to get spread amongst a lot more foliage. So decandling is an awesome technique, but it's really important to understand that it's not an automatic function. And that was one of the common mistakes that I made, was to just get into decandling because the calendar said so. And, my progress on trees a long time ago really suffered, and it's something that I suppose I want to make clear that you shouldn't do that. And if you're in doubt, shooting a photo through to a bonsai professional, they can pretty much tell you straight away, hey, yes, that's a tree that gets decandled, or no, that's not one that gets decandled. And the timing for it too. If you think about, and this is something I learned the really, really hard way, the decandling, just because I do decandling where I live on whatever date it is, doesn't mean that whoever's listening, you guys or girls or you people listening, it shouldn't be an automatic thing, because it really depends on you isolating your growing period. And that's what the most crucial part is. And I was told, as an example, I was always told that in Melbourne, where I live, that decandling was always done after Christmas Day. You have a great Christmas Day, you eat a big lunch, and then Boxing Day you get up and you go and decandle your trees. So I went, cool. You're experienced, you know what you're doing. I'll go and do exactly what you tell me to do. And I did it, and the needle length was so short that I hadn't left enough time in the growing period for my trees to grow needles that were long enough to be able to support the tree. And I'll come back to needle length in a minute and tree size. So then I thought, okay, well, you wait 12 months to find out the result. It's not like you can do your tree now and work out that it didn't work a week later and then fix it. It's purely a 12-month period before you get to decandle again. So then I went and did it in November. So I bounced back a couple of months. I thought, well, that was too late. I'm not going to be too late next time. I'm going to be early.
So I went and did it early, and then I just destroyed the tree because I ended up with really long internodes, really long needles, and I didn't achieve anything. I got the additional branches coming out, so that was one thing I achieved, but I didn't achieve the other purpose, which was the shorter needles and the shorter internodes. So third year, I go in and I do it a little bit, maybe partway through December, and I went, yeah, that's still wrong. So the fourth year, I bounced back and did it, later in November. I went, no, that's still too early. So after 5 years of trial and error with trees, I sort of worked out what the perfect timing for me was with decandling my trees. And that's what I'm trying to push, I suppose, or trying to force on you, is that no matter where you are around the world, decandling should be an option as long as your pine goes through a dormancy period, and depending on your growing season. Obviously, there's going to be places where you can't grow black pines, or you can't. Decandling is not an option for you. Maybe tropics, places like that. But all in all, if you can grow black pines well in your area, then decandling is one of the techniques that you can use. And finding out the timing for it means speaking to people in your local area. There's no point someone the other side of the world contacting me about it, because I can give you my explanation for it and I can give you my timings, but that's all based on my location, my climate, and my growing period, which is a really important part. If you have a really long growing period, then decandling time changes, and that's where I want to circle back to the needle length, because if you think about what we're doing with decandling is changing the period of time that we're giving the bonsai to grow new needles, then obviously with bigger trees, to keep everything in portion, what you need to do is you need to decandle a little bit earlier to give a longer growing period, to give a longer needle. And therefore, flip the coin, the other side, you've got really, really small black pines, then you obviously want smaller size needles. So therefore, what you do is you decandle a little bit later on, because that gives you smaller needles. So these are all things that sound great on paper, and I know there's climate change and seasons are changing all around the world, and these growing periods that year to year they can change. So your results are pretty much not guaranteed by picking the 10th of December as your date for decandling. Doesn't mean if you do it 10th of December every year, you're going to get exactly the same result, but you should get fairly consistent results. You should be able to pretty much, bank on a certain range of things happening. I've talked about this in previous podcasts, where all of my actions have to be predictable and they have to be repeatable. So I know that I can confidently go into decandling my black pines if they meet these certain requirements of health and vitality. Then I can almost guarantee, I've got to be really careful what I say on this podcast, but I can almost guarantee myself that I will get a certain result with those trees, because I know the background, I know the history, I know how they've been looked after, I know how they've been watered, I know where they've been kept, so I can bank on it year on year that I'm going to get a fairly consistent result, and that's really, really important. But it's definitely one of those things that I go into every year with my black pines and say, I am decandling. I don't look at it and say, well, it's the third year and I was told that you need to give your trees a rest from decandling every third year, otherwise they will suffer. To me, that's not right. And the approach that I take is it's based on the health of the tree. So if the tree's strong enough to do it, then I will decandle every single year. And there's pines that I've done that for 10, 15 years where I've been decandling and haven't stopped, because I know that I can keep the tree to a certain level with its strength. There are pines where I don't decandle, and if I put one on the bench in front of me and I look at it and I've got doubt and I go, yeah, geez, doesn't look right, I don't roll the dice and say, I'm going to decandle it anyway, because it's decandling time and I want shorter internodes and I want shorter needles and I want division, I want this, I want that. It's like, no. If I've got doubts on any part of a black pine when it's presented to me, then it's like, no, I think I'll wait. I think I'll leave it. So anyway, that's part of what I've been doing, which is what I like to talk about in the podcast and share with you guys to like I said, to keep it relevant and time appropriate. So if you're not listening to this podcast in December,
of 2022, which is where we're at now, then, and which is our summer. Start of our summer period in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. If you're not listening to it now, then please don't go out and decandle your black pines. Wait until the appropriate time, and then listen to this podcast again when it's your time for decandling. And I hopefully it's been able to help.
I spent my youth dropping coins in a wishing well. One day that I would find the story.
Righto, so on to more of my trip to Japan, which was my first one, which is probably the most eye-opening and educational of the lot. And what did I learn? I'm looking at this coming into day 2. What did I learn? I learned that I probably need to hit the reset button on a lot of things and go back to being someone who was willing to learn rather than present what I knew or what I could do. I learnt that wiring is an absolute skill, and it takes a lot of dedication. And even though there's 2 ways to wire, you can achieve the same result. One looks really crap and shouldn't be done, and the other one looks great and is elegant and purposeful and is secondary to the bonsai, which is the most important part for me. The bonsai should present as itself, and people then should be drawn into the tree. And my catalyst for that is having friends over who don't know bonsai that well, and they look at the tree and go, "That's amazing." And when they start digging in nice and close to it, that's when they start to see that there's wire on there, and they go, "Oh wow, is that how you do that? Is that why you do this?" And rather than looking at a tree from a distance and seeing that it's about 15 kilos of wire on it, top to bottom, and it's just looks like it's an anchor for a boat. And the other thing that I learnt, lots of different things. I learned a lot about branch angling coming from the trunk, which I hadn't really thought about much before that, and why once it was explained to me why I then liked or was drawn to certain bonsai because of branch angles. We had to have a chat about it in the workshop, and we talk about, branch angling coming out of the trunk, and certain species, really it's more inclined to have, say, a harsher sort of more angled bend straight from the trunk than say other species which sort of are an up and down type scenario. And not everything has to comply to a certain type of branch angle, but from my point of view and my perspective, it was more that what I was drawn to, and it was like a light bulb moment where, when it was discussed, I went, "Oh right." So then I went for a walk around the yard. I remember looking at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bonsai, and I'd go, "Just pick one that you love." And I'd not that it was hard, but I'd get to one and I'd go, "I love this, root over rock trident maple. Why do you love it?" And I'd go back and I'd start with, let's look at the branch angle as it comes out of the trunk. Just focus on that. Don't look at the ramification. Don't look at the beautiful roots flowing down a magnificent rock. Don't look at it and think, that's 300 years old. Look at the branch angle. And that's when I went, right, that's what they were just talking about. And then I go to another one. Pick another one that you really love. All right, this one's a white pine. Look at the branch angle. That's the only thing I focused on was the branch angle. And I looked at it and I went, that's exactly what we're talking about. Like, that one's got a really acute, a sharp 45 degree or angle-ish from the trunk. Then I would look at it and go, wow, that really just sets the tree to, in my mind, be perfect from step one. Like, you've got obviously a beautiful trunk, a beautiful nabari, and so much going for the thing that it's hard to focus on one little part. But branch angle was key, and it was like, oh my God, I've never ever thought at that point about how important branch angle can be when it leaves the trunk. So then part of the learning over that entire trip was that, how do you achieve that? Like, how do you get that with your wiring? And, if you've got a thick branch that's coming out and it's, been growing upwards, or it's on an angle with, 90-degree angle coming straight out from the trunk, how do you then get that to where you want? And what's the technique? And that's a big part of my learning over there was major branch bending in that first trip, and I was blown away of what you could do and achieve and how you did it. The technique for using pieces of steel bar to bend a branch at a particular point and isolate it right back to that specific point so you could achieve exactly what you wanted and not destroy the tree or kill the branch or rip it clear out was amazing. And how far you could go at certain points and how you'd let fibres stretch and then return to do it over time and using guy wires and all that sort of stuff. It was really amazing. I talked a lot about grafting back then. That was a lot of my approach was, and to be honest with you, my first approach to grafting was, how do I rush things? How can I use this technique of grafting, of putting foliage where there's no foliage, to rush a design? You've got a branch that's long, and rather than building strength and waiting for backbiting and then restarting branch structure, how do I rush it to put a graft in there to achieve what I want to achieve? And grafting is a great technique. I don't begrudge it at all, but for me now, grafting is a technique that I'll use, but it's not something that is my go-to every time. I'll certainly look at ways that I can naturally change structure on trees to achieve what I want. And if that means, sort of a 3-year period, well, really with grafting, it's a very long process anyway. It might seem like it's quick, but to get the grafts to take and, be successful, it's a real skill and a real technique, and it's sort of like rolling a dice. You're not always going to get the expected outcome, but you might strike it. So, part of the advice was if you want grafting to work and you've got 3 spots where you want it to work, then put in 30 grafts. If you get 5 that take, well, you'll be successful. If you put in 3 grafts and none of them take, then you'll think the expedition has been a failure. Whereas, putting in multiple and getting a very slim result to take is a better result than achieving nothing. So, so I learned a lot about grafting. Also got given after working out mistakes I'd made on my first tree that I worked on and learning from those and taking a step forward, I was given another big pine to work on, and one of the lessons that I learnt was that some things you just can't rush. So I had this big back pine to clean, and it took me according to my notes, it took me 7 hours on this second day of cleaning, and I'd made a big underline section that there's still more to do before I can start wiring. So, I think if I worked on the same tree now, it wouldn't be 7 hours of work, but to learn things properly, you need to go slowly. You can't rush things. You need to apply really good technique over a long period of time to make great bonsai repeatedly. You cannot push something too fast. So that was part of what I learned, and also learned that one thing that's never talked about when you work on bonsai is your posture. And I've made a big note that I had a really sore back, and I'd stuffed it because of sitting poorly or working at inappropriate heights and inappropriate angles, and that's one thing that I definitely don't do now. Is I have adjustable height work trolleys, which a lot of people message me about. They're just called hydraulic motorbike lifts, and you can find them on a lot of online stores that sell these things, and they're adjustable in height. They hold a great deal of weight, so they're perfect for the smallest to the largest trees. And I've got wheels on mine so I can zip them all around the workshop, and I've got a range of them for obviously students when they come through, but from my point of view, I can bring in multiple trees and have them sitting around the workshop for whatever reason I need them in there, and wheel them around and work on them comfortably. So I now definitely work with a straight back, and I sit down when I need to, and I stand up when I need to, and I can adjust the height of the tree. And I have work platforms for when the trees are too large so I can get up over and above the tree, and I'm not putting myself in uncomfortable positions. That was a really, really important thing that I learnt the hard way. I also had notes that the food over there, there was one where again not speaking Japanese and Japanese English being sort of limited at the time, it was a bowl of ramen for dinner, and I've written with stuff in it. It was magnificent. I made a note that it was just beautiful, but I had no idea of what the contents were, and speaking to the other apprentices that were there, they were like, nah, don't know, just go with it. So I did, and that was one thing that I'd sort of opened up a lot more to, was just go for it. As I talked about last time, you travel, you experience different things, and you're not imposing what you do back home or what you have back home. So I found that was amazing. So then we went on afterwards to talk about preventative stuff, and that was a big thing for me, was talking about preventative spraying of trees. And I know that that's not a popular thing with people, using insecticides and fungicides, and I understand all that, but it was part of my learning over there, was to try and prevent things from happening before they become a problem. And that was like another, wow, okay, so don't be reactive, be preventative. And being preventative can take the shape of many things, not just using nasty chemicals. It can stem from things like, your repotting frequency on your tree. It stems from your fertilising regime. It stems from when you prune, opening things up to make sure that you're getting sun and air in there to move on fungal spores that come and land on the trees. And it means it makes sure that you get it into a sunny spot so the tree's health continues to grow because it's getting enough sunlight, because if it doesn't, there's consequences. So preventative maintenance doesn't always take the form of going to a hardware store and buying a chemical and putting a sprayer on a backpack and going around and spraying things. Sure, that is part of the process for me, but it's not the entire part of the process. And so I was starting to build this picture in my head very, very early in my trip, from speaking to these bonsai legends, that it's not always about what the tree looks like. You've got to start stepping back from the tree and going, well, yeah, sure, I want it to look magnificent. I want it to be a world-class art piece. That's all of our desire. We want it to be beautiful, and I think sometimes we're too hard on ourselves when we look at our trees and want to wish that time away and get to the end point, but the journey's the most important part. But I was starting to build these blocks for myself with this trip to Japan, saying that, well, okay, maybe I just need to change my focus a little bit. I need to, one, improve my technical skills. Secondly, I need to reset on a lot of things that I've learned and maybe unlearn them and start again. And thirdly, I need to start focusing on a lot of other things other than what the tree looks like. What it looks like is part of it, but it's definitely not the entire picture. And I've made notes that there's so much more to bonsai than the tree, and it's so true. There's everything that comes with it. And part of the journey to Japan was not only sitting there and learning bonsai, but it was to experience bonsai life. That was it was I think towards the end of this first trip where a light went off in my head and thought, well, maybe I could start a bonsai business. Maybe I could pass on this information. Maybe I could become an education point in my community to help people get this light bulb moment a lot earlier in their journey than what I found was available where I lived. So part of it was to go and visit people and travel with these bonsai professionals to other people's collections. And I remember that I went to this one customer, and as you walked in there to look at a private collection, to me it was like walking into a museum or something that I'd seen on previous trips at the Bonsai Village in Omiya, that or stuff that I'd seen in magazines, where you looked at these trees and were like, my goodness, these are all your private collection. These aren't trees which are on display or anything. This is just someone's backyard in a collector, an enthusiast in Japan. And I thought, wow, if it can be done there, it can be done anywhere, which, at that time I'm feeling naive and very small in the world of bonsai. Of course it can. It can be done at any garden or any collection that can be made to look a certain way. But walking in and looking at trees, I've made a note that there was a red pine, which I remember, and a quince, which was incredible. And I was told that they're previous Kokofu winning trees. And it was like, wow. So that's when I suddenly got to learn that, these professionals look after these trees with the collectors, with the idea of building this beautiful bonsai, this piece of art. And that was really eye-opening for me at that time as well. And walking around these gardens, and I went back to this garden later on because, as I'll talk about, in future episodes of the podcast, there was a time where we got to go to take trees from this collection to the show to present and to display. And picking pots that trees would get slip potted into just to be put on display for a few days at Kokofu was just an incredible thing that I'd never thought was possible. So it was really really good. And so the day would be broken up with jumping in the van, travelling around, going, seeing things like this, having my mind completely blown, and then jumping back in the car and heading back to the workshop and then getting to work on this pine that was in front of me. And I think it was, I don't know if it was an intentional thing from where I was studying to help build me as a bonsai person, but it certainly had an impact on me, because I remember I would go back to the workshop and I would look at this tree that was in front of me with renewed vigor and potential. And I would also scale it where, you know, I'd be presented with a tree and I'd go, oh my God, this is the best bonsai that I've ever seen. And I am so privileged to work on it. And I still remember thinking that way, but I would look at it and go, okay, so it's still got areas where it can develop. And that was another part of this trip, was that no matter what's presented in front of you, you've still got to look for advancements. You never look to maintain the status quo. You always look to add on to that tree in any shape, you know, whether it's, you know, branch positioning or it's whatever. There are the routine things that we do, but there's also got to be a plan for every single bonsai that I work on. Not to say, well, you know, you're static, that's the way it's going to be. It's not the case. It's always, all right, so how can I then take this tree to the next level? And that started at that point. And at that point, like I was, you know, I'm not saying after 2 days in Japan I had everything that I needed, but I certainly looked at things a different way, and I could see, not flaws isn't the right word, but I could see potential for things to change in trees from then on. And I remember walking around the yard later on in the trip and subsequent trips as well, and even to bonsai shows from then on. And I would look at trees, and even now when I look at images of my trees online, or I look at other people's trees that I see on social media, and I don't do it in a negative way. I don't do it to be derogatory, but I always look at things and think, how would I change that tree to potentially improve it? And how would I? And it's, for all of us, it's a valuable lesson, I think, that, you know, I can pass on to you now, that we all see the trees differently, which is the best part of bonsai. You know, what I see is, you know, in inverted commas, perfect. It's not how you see it, and I don't intend it to be how my view of perfection to be your view of perfection. That's very personal, but it definitely means that when we look at trees, you know, you look at things and go, well, I love it, still looks great, but, you know, I would do this and I would do that. And I get these messages from people where they'll look at the tree and I go, hey, have you thought about, you know, whatever? And it's like, that's so cool. Like, I love it. No, I'm not going to change my bonsai, because to me, I love where it's at and I can see a path for it myself. But I 110% fully appreciate and support that you've got a different approach to how you see the tree, and I encourage it. You know, you shouldn't look at things the same way as other people, and there should always be that potential for improvement. So Japan was you know, after a couple of days getting really, 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 really deep for me at that point. So you know, I'd learnt that, you know, sometimes what I valued on trees can be devaluing overall. Like I was shown images of a tree that at that point was deemed to be a super expensive tree, and it was valued at, you know, 300,000, which is still that's a ton of money. Like, it's, you know, it's hard to fathom how an individual could afford that kind of money on a bonsai. But anyway, nevertheless, that was the way it was, and it became devalued because there was dieback on the trunk, and there was a shari made. So a shari is the deadwood, the trunk deadwood on a bonsai, and this tree then got revalued and it was knocked down to approximately 50,000. So whereas I looked at the tree with the shari on it and I went, wow, that looks beautiful. Like, it's so old, it's ancient. It's adding character to the tree. It's making it appealing. And looking at the before, I could see why, yeah, geez, that is a magnificent tree. But I didn't think in my mind that the value of the tree should have changed significantly just because of this shari, this deadwood, or this dying part or dead part of the tree. But nevertheless, it did. So it changed my perspective to think that, you know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and
that's part of the reason why I love bonsai. I learned lots of different techniques and stuff too in Japan. Like things, how to deal with sick trees and what was done, what they do in the nursery and how they managed it, and that came a lot to starting to focus on the roots of the tree and also leaving things alone when they're not well, not pushing things. And this is mind you, this sort of stuff, these sort of discussions were happening on day 2 of a reasonably in the time of in your lifetime, a reasonably short period of time. So it's my trip to Japan was definitely groundbreaking, and you can I look back and think about how I look at the way that I manage my trees and manage other people's trees and the advice that I provide. And when I come back to a lot of it, it's this really early trip to Japan that changed a lot of the fundamentals and the focus that I have on the tree. So it was really important. I loved it, and I'm not going to bore you anymore with it. But we getting into the next night's dinner, I've made a big note saying that one day to the next here is so diverse. I learn so much, I see so much. My eyes are open to things that I'd never thought would be open to before. And the next night's dinner was tacos. And I love tacos, but it was tacos with sashimi, so raw fish, rice and lettuce, and seaweed. And I had never, to that point, had a raw fish taco in my life, and I found it interesting. Like I was becoming a more well-rounded human being from this really short trip where, as I said, I threw myself into it and went there to soak up everything I possibly could, and the trip didn't disappoint because I was picking up things left, right, and centre, and I was learning a lot, and I was loving it, and I still love it now. I still think about my time there, and hopefully you can hear the enthusiasm that I've got for anyone that wants to do something like this, that wants to get out and experience something. That you do it with an open mind and an open heart, and you get so much more than what the financial cost of doing something like this. So, anyway, that's enough of the Japan learnings for now. We'll definitely come back to it. There's so much more, but I'm not gonna rattle on for too long with it. So we'll get into the next part of the podcast.
It's a burden that keeps me awake at night. We bless the sun 'cause it
Righto, so fundamentals of design. This is interesting. I really like this part of the podcast and the way it makes me think about things before I just start yapping on about them. And the one for today, well, the first one for today is colour. And when I looked at colour, I went, oh yeah, colour of foliage, yeah, autumn, beautiful, no worries, that's easy. I can talk about that. But then I think when you break down, when I walked around through my collection, and mind you, we're at the end of spring, so everything's nice and lush and green, and I look at it and think, well, why do I get drawn into the colour of some of these trees? What is it about the red leaf plum or prunus that I've got that draws me into it? And when you start thinking about colour and very specifically how it relates to bonsai, there's so many different facets to it. There is foliage colour. Yep, sure, foliage colour throughout the whole year. I love it. Spring, give me a Japanese maple when it's first popped its leaves and you've got them and they're slightly yellowy in colour with the red tips on them, and then they suddenly transition to a really bright, vibrant green, and then they go through summer to get to their more olive colour. They get darker as they harden off, and then the weather starts to turn cooler and they start to change colour and head towards a beautiful red colour before falling off at some point, being near towards a brown section. I mean, really, if you want to talk about a gamut of colours, that's not a bad start, to be honest. But then there's other species like an olive. And I looked at the olive and thought, well, how does colour apply to an olive? It's, it keeps its leaves, it doesn't drop them, it doesn't go through the autumn period. And why do I like the look of the colour of these olives that I've got? And so then I started breaking down, going, well, it's the colour of the trunk. I've got this beautiful, almost grey looking trunk on an olive with these beautiful, dark olive coloured leaves, plus the new ones are a brighter colour that are coming out, the spring ones. But then I broke it down further and I looked and went, well, okay, it's the pot that complements the trunk, which complements the foliage. So colour has a massive part to play in your appreciation or your enjoyment of bonsai, and it's different for all of us. I'm not assuming that we're all going to love things because they're, a certain colour, and some people might go, well, I don't get it. I don't enjoy that. But I've got a spruce that's on a slab of rock, natural rock, that's got some lichen on it. So when I sat back and walked to that tree and looked at it, I went, yeah, sure, foliage looking beautiful. It's got the two tones of green. It's got the new foliage, it's got the older foliage. It's got some cones coming out, which are a beautiful, bright, vibrant, pinky purple colour. They then turn brown. Yep, love it. Trunk's got some nice aging bark on it now. So there's the lighter greys, there's the darker greys, and so I found that the trunk is complementing, the greens and the reds of the burgundies of the cones. And then I come down to the soil and there's moss. Moss and you can get moss that's not just one colour, it's multiple coloured as well. So you've got the colour pattern of that linking with the colour of the trunk and onto this old natural slab of stone, which has got the lichen on it. And it's, hints of grey, it's got the black, it's got, the light green of the lichen, it's got some yellowy green bits of that as well. So when I sat back and I looked at that tree, not for structure, not for positioning, not for anything but colour, I went, it's really beautiful. Like there is so much to appreciate with each of your bonsai when it comes down to that. And yeah, sure, I chose that slab. I chose to keep the lichen in certain spots. I chose to have the moss planted on top of the trunk. But I don't think until I was preparing for this podcast, I'd actually put it all together and just appreciated that bonsai for the colour that was involved in the display itself. And then you've got other things like your complementary plantings, your other things that go with it, whether it's an accent or it's it's a cast, it's a little figurine, something like that plays such an important role, or it's a scroll on display, or it's whatever it is, a grass. That all has a part to play. The stand colour that you use to display your trees, it's not like, okay, you've got one strand, just rotate it through all of your trees. I know when I put together trees to go on display at show, I spent a lot of time trying to complement the colours that I have presented within the tree itself with the stand. So the stand then either accentuates or draws you to a certain part of the tree. Maybe it's, a more bold colour draws you to the pot first, and from there you work your way up the trunk, up the nabari, up the trunk to see it. Other times it might be a nice natural slab of wood where you have something on there where straight away you're drawn to the tree, and then you work your way down the trunk and you get to the display itself and you get to see that beautiful natural piece of wood. So it's something a bit more subtle but still draws the viewer in. And that the colour scheme or the involvement of colour in that design is super important. And I jump around to other trees like my black pines. Some of the things that I love about black pines are, one, needle quality. Yeah, sure, I love it. It's got that green. It's got that reliability that when I think of something majestic in the world of bonsai, for me personally, I love pines. I love them. And I'm just talking about black pines at the moment because we sort of started this podcast with discussing the black pines. But, that beautiful olivey green, the needles change colour obviously through from spring through to winter. And they go from that beautiful, bright, vibrant to the hardened off, more olive colour. And, if you look after the trees properly and you don't get spider mites, you don't get banding on the needles and you don't damage them when you're working on them, they just look beautiful. When they're in a nice tight cluster, I love it. And then you head back towards the trunk and you see the bark. And the aging bark on a black pine is magnificent when it starts getting plates. But even when it doesn't, you're looking at younger trees that may have more of a grey colour to their trunk, then the complement of that
like with the olive before, the complement of that beautiful olive green of the needles against the trunk itself is magnificent. And when I design my trees, my bonsai, I always have parts where you can look through. And the next thing I'm going to talk about is space. So I'm going to I'll come back to it a bit more, but I always have it where I can use areas of nothing for the viewer to be drawn in to look at a trunk, and that view of the trunk, it's where the colour of the trunk complements or contrasts the foliage of the tree to create interest that looks lovely. And I think that, I've had nothing to do with the colour of the trees. It's not me. It's a higher being. It's the bonsai gods which make them look the way they look. But I think that I'm a great believer that you can definitely, with your design and your structuring and choices that you make, how you present foliage can be used to strongly accentuate or present or display the colour of the foliage against another colour, being the trunk of the tree. And pots are enormous. In my notes for the podcast, I've written very important, the pot. And it's not just the shape of the pot, it's the colour of the pot, it's the texture of the pot that becomes part of it. Texture is an incredible thing, but taking that aside and just focusing on colour for now, that's why I think that when you get further on in your bonsai journey, you'll find that you'll have lots of pots sitting around without trees in it. It's highly unusual that you will just have the exact number of pots that you need for the exact number of bonsai that you have, because it just doesn't work that way. You start acquiring beautiful pots throughout time that maybe one day will be used for a bonsai. And I know myself, in my workshop, I have pots on display with nothing in them, just because I love the look of them. I can truly appreciate a good pot when I see it, and a lot of that is colour. I have yellow pots for some of my deciduous, which I love. I truly love yellows and reds in pots, because it makes a really bold, strong statement, but it can be used. You think about it, I've got a small Chinese elm, which I'm spreading my fingers apart now in the podcast. I hope you can see it. Anyway, it's about 10 to 15 centimetres tall, thereabouts, somewhere in that range. So it's quite a small little tree. Started from a root cutting. It's in a really old Japanese Hattori pot that's yellow, so it's got nice patina on it. But, for me, when I look at that tree, I always start at the pot, because, one, I appreciate that it's a magnificent little pot. It's got some real age to it, so I'm starting at, there's patina on it. But it's the yellow that draws me in, and from there, to paint a visual picture for you, you come up to the moss level of this pot, and it's just beautiful. It's lush. It's nice. I always take great care with making sure that, even though it's quite a small pot that's only maybe 8-10 centimetres wide. No, it wouldn't be 10 centimetres, 8 centimetres wide. That there's different types of moss in there, that one doesn't become too dominant for the other, so I can see the different colours in there of the moss. And then the trunk, it's because it's a root cutting, it's barked up quite nicely. It's getting quite old, and then I get to the beautiful lush foliage at this time of the year, where it's still got its spring growth happening, and when I look at that picture together, it makes me smile. I love it, and that's where colour can be really, really important to your personal satisfaction. It's complementary items, whether they're they flow along the same line, like a bluey green pot for a deciduous tree that, when it's lost its leaves, it still has that bluey green tinge to it that draws you in, or whether it's something that contrasts it completely. It doesn't always have to follow the same line, but colour of your bonsai, and so I haven't mentioned once flowers on bonsai, because that is super important, but it's very obvious that we acquire or we appreciate bonsai that have flowers, because they're magnificent, they're beautiful. But those flowers come and go. So, yeah, sure, I definitely have some azaleas that I will have in certain coloured pots. So when they flower, the flower complements the pot or contrasts it, so it's like a beautiful visual image. But it's not always the colour of the pot that I focus in on when I look at things like that, or when I appreciate bonsai. That flower, it's certainly that microsecond in their life when they pop those flowers that I can appreciate the colour, and we can all be drawn into something beautiful from there.
So going on to the next fundamental of design, it's space, and this is something that I do strongly involve in my design process for bonsai. And it's not always, negative space is one of those things. It's space where there's nothing, and I use that a lot to draw people in, or draw the viewer of a bonsai into an area. So you might analyse a little bit deeper, and that's where your view goes. More often than not, where there's no foliage or there's a space, there's that negative space, that's where you are drawn in. And I think it's crucial for me, again, this design is personal, so it's for me, that I use negative space a certain way that I am guaranteed of having an impact. And I hope it's a positive impact using negative space that people can look at and go, that's beautiful, look at that, that's amazing. And when I talk to family and friends that look at a tree and I go, why do you like that one? What is it about it? Is it, just tell me. I don't want to force a decision, but they're sort of like, I love this, you can see into this part of the tree, and it's really inviting, and it's like, bang, done, tick, good on me, pat on the back, break my arm, pat myself on the back, because that's exactly what I want to achieve. I want to draw someone in. And when I was talking about colour, I sort of have this approach to my trees where every now and then, a fair way up the trunk, I'll have a branch at the front that sort of slips across partly or fully across the trunk line, and then above it have sort of nothing. So the viewer sort of looks, they see a nice trunk. There's a bit of a distraction with a pad there, or some foliage, and then it goes back to the trunk. And it's that point that I think I get best bang for my buck with not only presenting colour variations or colour differentials, but also that use of space. It's easy, and it might not sound like it when you're first starting bonsai, but it's so easy to end up with a really dense, thick canopy of foliage, where it grows together as a clump. Like, it just becomes a nice silhouette, which is, great. Nice silhouette in a bonsai is great, but I think it's really important to break those silhouettes up so you have space between branches, space between pads, even at the apex level. Don't make it just a thick dome that looks like a pudding bowl. Break it up a little bit so it still achieves the same desired silhouette, the outside shape of whatever it is you're trying to achieve, but break it up internally so it's made up of many separate areas that are disconnected and have space in there. That's when space becomes massively important with our bonsai. And I think that, it's one of those things that it's easy to talk about. It's hard to achieve initially, but once you start opening it up and you make errors in design, it's not forever. This is not clay we're dealing with. This is a living being. So if you trim back foliage and sort of go, oh, it's probably a bit much now there's a bit much of a gap there, let it grow a little bit, and redesign or reorganize. But definitely use space. When you go out after listening to this podcast and you've got that refreshing drink in your hand, whether it's a cup of tea, a glass of water, beer or wine, whatever rocks your boat, whatever floats your boat, then I would look at it and think about space as an element that possibly could be used on every single bonsai that you've got in your collection. And don't think of it as, I want to graft a branch here because there's a space. Think about it and go, okay, Scott's talked about space, particularly negative space. How can I incorporate that space into my design? Is there a way that I could have this branch come down and around that part of the trunk and incorporate that negative space? If you've got a long branch with foliage just at the end of it, rather than looking at it going, I'm going to cut it off, there's nothing I can do with it, it's just a really long branch, just think, okay, is there a way that I could take that really long branch, have it so it's a hanging branch that drops down with the foliage pad, so it's got movement in it, which is one of the things we've talked about with design, the design fundamentals. If you've got the nice colour contrast, which we just talked about, of that branch coming down and the beautiful foliage contrasting it at the other end of the pad, and then you can incorporate space into the design as well, where between the trunk and where that branch comes down, you've got negative space that draws you in and therefore draws the viewer of the bonsai in. Is there a way that you can do that? Don't always think about, it doesn't meet the rule of having foliage within, a couple of centimetres of where it comes out from the trunk. Just think, okay,
how can I use the fundamental of space to incorporate this design? It may not be possible. It may be something which is just, completely off charter for the design of that tree. But if you can incorporate that sort of spacing into the design, then definitely. And then go one step further, look at all of your pads. Can your pads be broken up further rather than having, this is one of the things that I learned in Japan, which I'm going to talk about somewhere down the track, which, one of the golden rules that, scrap rules, one of the golden guidelines or considerations, that's a better word, golden considerations you should have that was taught to me. It was one of these light bulb moments that I had 100 million of them while I was over there. But one of them was that, if you can turn one pad into 3 pads, then do it. Don't keep it as one big god-awful pad. Break it into separate areas of interest at different planes, different heights, different angles, where you can draw viewers in to give the same impression of shape to the design, but you're incorporating space between the different branches and different areas, and that idea of separation and interest. That's really what it's about. I think that, you might have a tree that you've looked at the same way for years and years and years, and just go, well, nothing's happening with it. You might be getting bored with it. Go back, break apart the foliage with your hands and have a look and say, okay, well, yeah, there's an opportunity here for me to take this branch, wire it over here, cut out some of the foliage, make a separate pad for it, incorporate space between that and the next one visually, so then it breaks it apart into multiple areas of interest on the tree. And I think that you'll find that you'll love that as a design element that we can use. Also, space between trees. That's on benches. One, horticulturally, it's nice to not have everything jammed together, but visually, if you can have space between one tree to the next, you look at them differently. And that's where, if you look at some of the great shows, and there's been an amazing one in America recently, which if you just have a hunt around Google, you'll find the details for it. But there's an amazing show over there where they used a nice open area that had a lot of space visually for trees, and also the distance between the trees was perfect, where each tree stood on its own merit, and the space between them actually magnified the effect. So, a bonsai show with 1,000 trees in it, where they're all jammed on benches, I think is probably worse than a bonsai show with 10 trees in it, where they're all got their own space and their own positioning, and they're all able to stand on their own 2 feet, for want of a better word. But they can present as themselves and use that space between them to really get that wow factor, that bang for your buck when you walk into these shows. And if you have a hunt around now and you look through any bonsai show, you'll see where there are some where they just jam them in, and a lot of local clubs do that because they've got so many members and they've only got limited space. So I get why they do it, but incorporating space into displaying your trees and separating things out, there might be a 3-point display where you've got 3 elements to your display. Having that spread out over, depending on the size of the tree, but let's say a 1.5 metre space is far better than trying to jam it together over 880 centimetre space, where it's you got roughly half the size, and you're trying to, sure, it's a 3-point display, but you're jamming everything in there. It's almost no point doing it as a 3-point display, because the impact you're trying to get by using that space between items is just not going to be achieved. So there's a lot to it, and I think you can dig further. But for me, I primarily use space from the point of view of positioning and drawing attention. And I think it's a fundamental a really important fundamental for design with our bonsai. Well, there we are, folks. Thank you for listening in. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it as always. And this is my 11th podcast for the year. So after a bit of a gap in the middle of the year for life changing and going to be a bonsai professional, that was a fist in the air moment for me that I love, and I don't regret 1 second of it. I'm actually I don't think I've ever been this happy. So hopefully that comes across in the podcast to you guys, as well as my enthusiasm seeping through your headphones or through the radio. That I love this. I love the podcast. I love the opportunity it gives me to bring hope and potential to everyone that does bonsai around the world, which I think is, it's really, really important. Probably one of the most important things that I do, to be honest. And I was recently a guest on a podcast, Ikigai, which I will be sharing a link for later on, because I think that it's nice to sort of spread the good word, and Ikigai Empowerment was the company, and they got me on to talk about bonsai, and really it's hard not to talk about bonsai in a positive vein. And one of the things that was talked about was, what mediums do I present across, or how do I give to the community? And I use everything. I use anything that's available, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, the podcast, whatever possibly, direct messaging with people, email, any way that I can communicate with people, I will do, because it's horses for courses. Some people like one thing, some people like another. So I try and spread myself around. And if something new pops up tomorrow, then you can bet that I'll be on it as well, because I think positivity in our world of bonsai is really important for all of us, and it's something that I hope you can feel the love from me to you, because it's, you're loving your bonsai. It makes me smile, and if I can play even the smallest part in keeping you out there with your scissors and making you, maybe put on a different pair of glasses to look at your trees differently from time to time, then that's great. And if they can go on and live forever, well, job done. I've done well. So thank you for listening, and I do appreciate it. I love the feedback. I love the engagement that you guys do with me, and I do honestly say that I'm here 100% for you guys to do whatever I can in the world of bonsai at any time. So please sing out via the socials is always the best. If you send me a message via Instagram or via Facebook, then I'll get you some information as much as I can. And how about, so thank you. We're heading towards the Christmas period, which is a time for us in Australia to get some downtime, and it's often a time that you can reflect on, put your feet up and reflect on your year with your bonsai, as well as other things, of course, but I'm only focusing on bonsai. And I do encourage you to do that and sit back and think about that planning phase that we all use for our bonsai, and not just the development of your trees, but around your yard. Can you change your display? Can you put some ground cover in growing so it looks a little bit different? Can you put in a watering system? Can you whatever? It's just good time for bonsai coming up, which makes me really happy. So thanks for tuning in, and I will stay in touch. This podcast is going nowhere, so I'll be talking to you soon. Until then, happy bonsai.